Marcus Chen had been driving the same route to work for 8 years, never once getting pulled over. But on this particular Tuesday morning in October, everything changed when Officer Rodriguez noticed something that would turn a routine traffic stop into the most shocking case of his 20-year career. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn sun was just breaking through the morning fog as Marcus Chen merged onto Interstate 94 outside Detroit. He glanced at his dashboard clock. 7:23 a.m. Perfect timing. His supervisor at the automotive plant had been cracking down on tardiness lately, and Marcus couldn't afford to be late. Not with his daughter's college tuition due next month. He pressed the accelerator of his silver Honda Accord, watching the speedometer climb to 78 miles per hour in the 65 zone. Just enough to keep up with traffic flow, he told himself. The freeway was packed with the usual morning commuters. Construction workers heading to job sites, office employees clutching coffee cups, and delivery trucks rumbling toward their first stops of the day. Marcus had always been a careful driver. In his 42 years, he'd received exactly 2 tickets, both for parking violations downtown. His insurance rates were rock bottom, and his driving record was spotless. But today felt different somehow. There was an urgency in his movements, a tension in his shoulders, that he couldn't quite explain. 3 miles ahead, Michigan State Police Officer Daniel Rodriguez was positioned behind a highway overpass, radar gun in hand. Rodriguez had been working this stretch of I-94 for the past 6 months, part of a new initiative to crack down on aggressive driving during rush hour. At 38, he was a veteran officer who'd seen just about everything the roads could throw at him. Drunk drivers, high-speed chases, accidents that would haunt him for years. Nothing surprised him anymore. Or so he thought. The radar gun chirped as Marcus's Honda passed by. Rodriguez glanced at the display, 78 miles per hour. Not excessive, but enough for a ticket. He'd already written 4 citations that morning, and his quota was nearly met. But something about the Honda caught his attention. The driver's posture seemed rigid, almost mechanical. His hands were gripped tightly on the steering wheel, and even from a distance Rodriguez could see the man's jaw was clenched. Rodriguez fired up his patrol car and pulled into traffic. The Honda was about a quarter mile ahead now, maintaining the same speed. No sudden lane changes. No attempt to blend in with slower traffic. Either the driver hadn't noticed the police car, or he was trying very hard to appear normal. Marcus saw the flashing lights in his rearview mirror and felt his stomach drop. Of all days, why today? He signaled right and began moving toward the shoulder, his mind racing through possible explanations he could give the officer. The truth wasn't an option. It never was. The shoulder was narrow, barely wide enough for both vehicles. Semis thundered past, their wind wake rocking both cars as Rodriguez approached the Honda. Through his windshield, he could see the driver's hands were shaking slightly as he reached for what Rodriguez assumed was his wallet. Rodriguez stepped out of his patrol car and walked toward the Honda, noting the Michigan plates. Nothing unusual there. The car was clean, well-maintained, maybe 3 years old. As he approached the driver's side window, he mentally prepared his usual greeting. License, registration, proof of insurance. Simple and routine. Marcus rolled down his window as the officer approached. "Good morning, officer," he said, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. "Morning," Rodriguez replied, adjusting his hat. "I clocked you at 78 and a 65. License and registration, please." Of course. Marcus reached toward the center console where he kept his wallet, but his hand trembled as he opened it. His driver's license slipped out and fell to the floor on the passenger side. "Take your time," Rodriguez said, though something in the man's demeanor was setting off alarm bells. In 20 years of traffic stops, he'd developed an instinct for when something wasn't right. The driver was too nervous for a simple speeding ticket. Marcus leaned over to retrieve his license, and, as he did, the glove compartment fell open. It hadn't been properly latched. A small metal plate tumbled out onto the passenger seat, catching the morning sunlight streaming through the windshield. Rodriguez's trained eye immediately focused on the object. Even from his angle outside the driver's window, he could see it wasn't a typical item someone would keep in their glove box. The plate appeared to be made of brushed steel, about the size of a business card, with what looked like official markings etched into its surface. "Sir, what's that plate that just fell out?" Rodriguez asked, his tone shifting from routine to investigative. Marcus's face went pale. He'd forgotten about the plate entirely. It had been hidden in the glove compartment for so long that it had become part of the car's forgotten landscape. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "I'm going to need you to hand me that plate," Rodriguez continued, his hand instinctively moving closer to his service weapon. Not threatening, just cautious. With trembling fingers, Marcus picked up the plate and passed it through the window. The moment Rodriguez's eyes focused on the etched markings, his entire demeanor changed. The casual traffic stop atmosphere evaporated instantly. The plate was government-issued, that much was clear from the official seal embossed at the top, but it was the series of numbers and letters below the seal that made Rodriguez's blood run cold. He'd seen similar identification plates before, but only in classified briefings. Only in contexts that were supposed to be theoretical. "Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle," Rodriguez said, his voice now carrying the full authority of his badge. Marcus's hands were shaking openly now. "Officer, I can explain." "Step out of the vehicle, now." As Marcus slowly opened his door and stood up, Rodriguez was already reaching for his radio. This was no longer a traffic stop. This was something that required backup and possibly federal involvement. The plate in his hand felt heavier than its actual weight, loaded with implications he was only beginning to understand. The morning commuters continued rushing past, completely unaware that their routine Tuesday was about to intersect with something much larger and more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. Rodriguez looked at Marcus, then at the plate, then back at Marcus. "Sir, you're going to need to explain to me very carefully how you came to possess federal identification belonging to someone who officially doesn't exist." Marcus stood beside his Honda, watching Officer Rodriguez examine the plate with a growing alarm. The morning traffic continued its relentless flow, but everything felt suspended in time. His mind raced through possibilities, calculations, escape routes. None of them viable. "The name on this plate," Rodriguez said slowly, "is Thomas Brennan. But according to our database, Thomas Brennan died in a car accident in Phoenix 3 years ago." He looked up at Marcus with steel in his eyes. "So either you're driving around with a dead man's federal ID, or Thomas Brennan isn't as dead as the government wants people to believe." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. After 8 years of careful living, of building a new identity from scratch, it was ending because of a broken glove compartment latch. "Officer, I need you to understand something. That plate, it's not what you think it is." "Then explain it to me." Rodriguez had called for backup, but kept his voice low. The last thing he wanted was to escalate this situation on a busy freeway with innocent civilians nearby. "My real name is Thomas Brennan," Marcus said quietly. "And yes, I'm supposed to be dead." Rodriguez felt his pulse quicken. In 2 decades of police work, he'd never encountered anything like this. Federal witness protection was one thing. That was relatively common knowledge among law enforcement. But this was something else entirely. The plate in his hands had markings he'd only seen in classified briefings about programs that officially didn't exist. "Keep talking," Rodriguez said, his hand remaining close to his weapon. "I was a software engineer at Blackwater Defense Systems in Virginia," Thomas continued, using his real name for the first time in years. "Specialized in encryption algorithms for military applications. In 2018, I discovered something I wasn't supposed to see." A semi-truck roared past, its wake buffeting both men. Rodriguez stepped closer to hear better, his eyes never leaving Thomas's face. The company had a contract with the Defense Department to develop secure communication systems for overseas operations. Standard stuff, or so I thought. But I found backdoors in the code, deliberate vulnerabilities that would allow third parties to intercept classified military communications. Rodriguez's training kicked in. He'd heard whispers about defense contractors with questionable loyalties, but nothing concrete. Third parties, meaning who? Foreign governments. The backdoors were so sophisticated that they looked like coding errors to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for them. But I was. And when I started digging deeper, I found financial records showing payments from shell companies tied to foreign intelligence services. The backup unit Rodriguez had called was still 5 minutes out. He made a decision to keep Thomas talking rather than wait. Sometimes the best interrogations happened in unexpected places. So you reported it? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thomas laughed bitterly. I tried to. First to my supervisor, then to company security, then to the FBI. But every time I got close to someone who would listen, the investigation would get shut down. People would get transferred. Evidence would disappear. It became clear that this thing went way deeper than just one defense contractor. How deep? Deep enough that when I finally assembled enough evidence to take to the Washington Post, my house burned down with me supposedly inside it. Thomas gestured to his face. I had plastic surgery to change my appearance. New fingerprints courtesy of some very expensive underground medical procedures. The whole Thomas Brennan identity was supposed to be buried forever. Rodriguez studied the man's face more carefully now. There were subtle signs of surgical alteration, the kind that would be invisible to casual observation but apparent to someone looking for them. The nose was slightly asymmetrical, suggesting reconstruction. Faint scars near the hairline indicated a possible brow lift or facial restructuring. The plate was your insurance policy, Rodriguez concluded. Exactly. If anything ever happened to me, if my new identity got compromised, that plate was supposed to be my ticket back into federal protection. It has authentication codes that would verify who I really am to the right people in the intelligence community. A Michigan State Police backup unit appeared in the distance, lights flashing as it approached their position. Rodriguez had to make a decision quickly. By the book, he should detain Thomas until federal authorities could sort this out. But his instincts were telling him something different. Thomas, he said, using the man's real name for the first time, if what you're telling me is true, then you're in immediate danger. The moment I run this plate through official channels, people are going to know you're alive and where you are. Thomas nodded grimly. I know. That's why I've been Marcus Chen for 8 years. I have a daughter who thinks her father is a plant supervisor from Detroit. I have a life that's built on lies, but it's a life where nobody's trying to kill me. The backup unit pulled up behind Rodriguez's patrol car. Officer Sarah Martinez stepped out, her hand resting casually on her service weapon as she approached. Rodriguez held up a hand to signal he had the situation under control. Martinez, I need you to set up a traffic perimeter about 50 yards back, he called out. This is going to take a few more minutes. Martinez nodded and returned to her vehicle to redirect traffic. Rodriguez turned back to Thomas, his mind working through the implications of what he'd just heard. Here's what's going to happen, Rodriguez said, making a decision that could end his career. I'm going to give you back this plate, and you're going to get in your car and drive away. But first, you're going to give me something that proves what you just told me. Thomas reached into his jacket pocket slowly, producing a small USB drive. 8 years ago, I made copies of everything. Financial records, communication intercepts, names of everyone involved. This drive has enough evidence to bring down a network that extends from defense contractors to sitting members of Congress. Rodriguez stared at the drive. Taking it would make him complicit in whatever conspiracy Thomas was describing. But if Thomas was telling the truth, then walking away would mean letting traitors operate with impunity. Why haven't you released this information? Because the last 3 people who tried to expose this ended up dead in apparent accidents, car crashes, heart attacks, a skiing accident in Colorado. All within 6 months of each other. All people who had access to pieces of what's on this drive. The weight of the decision pressed down on Rodriguez. He looked at Thomas, then at the USB drive, then at the federal identification plate that had started this entire sequence of events. Officer Rodriguez, Thomas said quietly, in about 10 minutes someone's going to run a check on this traffic stop. When they do, facial recognition software is going to identify me, and by tonight, Marcus Chen will disappear forever. Along with his daughter's father, his co-worker's friend, and 8 years of carefully built life. Rodriguez made his choice. He handed the plate back to Thomas and pocketed the USB drive. Get out of here. Take surface streets, avoid cameras, and figure out your next move fast. As Thomas climbed back into his Honda, Rodriguez realized he'd just stepped into something much larger and more dangerous than a simple traffic stop. The question now was whether he'd made the right choice or whether he'd just signed both their death warrants. Thomas pulled away from the shoulder, his hands steadier now that the truth was finally out. In his rearview mirror, he watched Officer Rodriguez return to his patrol car, the USB drive hidden in his uniform pocket. For the first time in 8 years, someone in law enforcement knew the truth and had chosen to help rather than destroy him. But Rodriguez's warning echoed in his mind, 10 minutes before facial recognition would identify him, maybe less. Instead of continuing toward the automotive plant where Marcus Chen was expected for his shift, Thomas took the next exit and began navigating surface streets through Detroit's industrial district. His phone buzzed with a text from his supervisor asking about his absence, but he ignored it. Marcus Chen's life was over. The only question now was whether Thomas Brennan could survive what came next. Rodriguez sat in his patrol car, staring at the traffic flowing past. Officer Martinez approached his window, her expression curious. "Everything okay with that stop, Rodriguez? It seemed like it took a while for a simple speeding ticket." "The driver had some issues with his paperwork," Rodriguez lied smoothly. "All sorted out now." But Martinez's trained eye caught something. "You didn't write him a ticket." Rodriguez cursed internally. In his focus on Thomas's revelation, he'd forgotten the basic mechanics of the traffic stop that had started everything. "License has expired. Let him off with a warning to get it renewed today." Martinez nodded, but Rodriguez could see she wasn't entirely convinced. Word would get back to their sergeant that he'd conducted an unusually long traffic stop without issuing a citation. More questions would follow. 20 minutes later, Thomas sat in a diner parking lot across town, using the restaurant's Wi-Fi to access news websites on his phone. If Rodriguez was right about the facial recognition timeline, there should be signs of activity soon. Government agencies didn't work quietly when they thought a dead asset had resurfaced. The first indication came as a breaking news alert: FBI conducting coordinated raids in Detroit area in connection with ongoing national security investigation. No details, but Thomas knew. They'd identified him, traced his movements, and were now systematically dismantling Marcus Chen's life. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his daughter's number. "Dad?" Emma's voice was shaky. "There are FBI agents at our apartment. They're asking about you. They want to know when you'll be home." Thomas felt his world collapse. In all his careful planning, he'd never adequately prepared for this moment. "Emma, listen to me very carefully. Tell them I left for work this morning like always, and you haven't heard from me since. Can you do that?" "Dad, what's happening?" "Are you in trouble?" "I need you to stay calm and do exactly what I tell you. After you talk to the agents, pack a small bag with just essentials. Don't let them see you do it. Can you get to Aunt Sarah's house in Ann Arbor without being followed?" Emma was crying now. "I don't understand. What did you do?" "I tried to do the right thing 8 years ago, and some very powerful people want to make sure I can never do it again." "Emma, I love you more than anything, but Marcus Chen can't exist anymore. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "No," she whispered. "Please don't leave me." The line went dead. Thomas stared at his phone, knowing he'd just destroyed his daughter's world to save her life. If the people hunting him realized Emma existed, she'd become leverage against him. Better she think her father was a criminal who abandoned her than a target who put her in danger. Meanwhile, Rodriguez was fielding increasingly aggressive questions from his sergeant about the morning's traffic stop. The license plate check on Thomas's Honda had triggered automated alerts that reached federal agencies within minutes of Rodriguez running the plates through the system. "Detective Walsh from the FBI wants to speak with you," Sergeant Morrison said, his tone indicating this wasn't a request. "He's driving down from the Detroit field office now." Rodriguez nodded calmly, but inside he was calculating. The USB drive was hidden in his locker at the station, but that wouldn't be safe much longer. If federal agents were getting involved, they'd want to examine everything connected to the traffic stop, including his personal effects. During his lunch break, Rodriguez drove to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. He rented a unit under his wife's maiden name, paid cash for 6 months, and secured the USB drive inside a waterproof container behind boxes of Christmas decorations. If something happened to him, his wife would find it eventually when she cleaned out the unit. Detective Walsh arrived at the station that afternoon, looking like he'd stepped out of a federal recruitment poster. Crisp suit, perfect haircut, and eyes that missed nothing. "Officer Rodriguez, I understand you conducted a traffic stop this morning involving vehicle registration Michigan plates Tango 74 Charlie Delta 9. "That's correct," Rodriguez replied carefully. "The driver, did he identify himself as Marcus Chen?" "He did." And you let him go with a warning for speeding? Rodriguez had prepared for this question. License check came back clean, no warrants, first offense. Seemed appropriate for 13, over the limit. Walsh consulted his tablet. Officer Rodriguez, the individual you stopped this morning is not Marcus Chen. His real name is Thomas Brennan, and he's wanted in connection with the theft of classified defense materials and multiple federal crimes. I had no way of knowing that, Rodriguez said. His license appeared legitimate. Did he say anything unusual during the stop? Act nervous? Mention any other names or locations? He seemed nervous, but most people do when they get pulled over. Nothing else stood out. Walsh studied Rodriguez's face for several seconds. Officer, if Thomas Brennan made contact with you, if he gave you anything or told you anything about his activities, withholding that information would constitute obstruction of a federal investigation. He didn't give me anything, and we only talked about his speed and his license. Walsh left his business card and a clear warning that Rodriguez should contact him immediately if he remembered any additional details about the traffic stop. That evening, Rodriguez sat in his backyard with a beer, watching his children play on their swing set. His wife was inside preparing dinner, unaware that her husband had potentially ended his career that morning by helping a fugitive escape federal custody. The local news led with the story. Federal manhunt underway for Detroit area resident believed to be using false identity. They showed a photo of Marcus Chen from his work ID, then morphed it into what appeared to be an older image of Thomas Brennan. The resemblance was clear once you knew what to look for. The individual is considered extremely dangerous, the news anchor continued, and may be in possession of materials related to national security. Rodriguez's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thank you for giving me a chance to say goodbye to my daughter. The drive will tell the real story. Nidist T. 6 hours after Thomas disappeared, the first domino fell. A secure server in Switzerland began uploading terabytes of classified documents to multiple news outlets simultaneously. Thomas had programmed a dead man switch. If he didn't check in every 12 hours, the evidence would automatically be released. The leak started small. A single document appeared on WikiLeaks at 3 a.m. Eastern Time, detailing suspicious financial transfers between Blackwater Defense Systems and a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Within an hour, major newspapers had reporters working phones, trying to verify the authenticity of what appeared to be explosive revelations about defense contractor corruption. But Thomas wasn't taking any chances with gradual disclosure. At 6 a.m., the floodgates opened. Rodriguez was getting ready for his shift when breaking news interrupted regular programming. Massive federal conspiracy uncovered as classified documents surface online. The leaked materials detailed exactly what Thomas had described, but the scope was far worse than even he had initially realized. The network included defense contractors in 12 states, government officials from both political parties, and foreign operatives from at least 6 different countries. They had been systematically compromising U.S. military communications for over a decade, selling access to the highest bidders. The documents revealed specific operations where compromised communications had led to the deaths of American soldiers overseas. Mission parameters leaked to hostile forces. Convoy routes sold to insurgent groups. Safe house locations betrayed to enemy agents. The human cost of the conspiracy was measured not just in dollars, but in lives. Rodriguez felt sick as he read the details. Every document was meticulously sourced. Every financial transaction verified through multiple databases. Thomas hadn't just collected evidence. He'd built an airtight case that would be impossible to deny or discredit. The reporter continued. The documents appear to have been released by Thomas Brennan, the former defense contractor who was believed dead for 3 years. Brennan surfaced yesterday during a routine traffic stop in Detroit, but disappeared before federal agents could apprehend him. Rodriguez smiled grimly. Thomas had kept a copy of the files and released them as insurance. The truth was finally out, which meant the people hunting him no longer had a reason to keep him quiet. By noon, FBI Director Harrison called an emergency press conference. Standing at a podium with the Department of Justice seal behind him, he looked like a man who'd aged 10 years overnight. The FBI is launching the largest counterintelligence investigation in the agency's history, Harrison announced. We are treating these leaks as authentic pending full verification, and we are coordinating with multiple federal agencies to identify and apprehend all individuals involved in what appears to be a sophisticated espionage network. Behind the scenes, panic was spreading through Washington. Congressional leaders who had been briefed on the leaked documents were calling for immediate hearings. The Secretary of Defense had already submitted his resignation. Stock prices for major defense contractors were in freefall as investors fled anything connected to the scandal. Rodriguez watched the press conference from the station break room, surrounded by fellow officers who had no idea their colleague had played a pivotal role in the day's events. Detective Walsh appeared in the doorway, his previously composed demeanor replaced by barely controlled urgency. "Rodriguez, I need to speak with you again. Now." This time, the questions were different. Walsh wasn't fishing for information. He was trying to understand how Thomas had managed to stay hidden for so long and what had triggered his decision to surface. "Officer, I'm going to ask you directly. Did Thomas Brennan give you anything during that traffic stop? A USB drive, documents, any form of storage device?" Rodriguez maintained his composure. "As I told you yesterday, he handed me his license and registration, that's all." These leaked documents had to come from somewhere. Brennan didn't have internet access from his vehicle, which means he either had help or he'd prepared this release in advance. "I wouldn't know anything about that," Rodriguez replied. "I write tickets and respond to accidents. Computer conspiracies are way above my pay grade." Walsh studied him for a long moment. "Officer Rodriguez, I want you to understand something. This investigation is going to touch every aspect of Thomas Brennan's life for the past 8 years. Every person he interacted with, every transaction he made, every place he visited. If there's any connection between you and him beyond that traffic stop, we will find it." After Walsh left, Rodriguez realized his situation had become far more precarious. The conspiracy was so vast that federal investigators would be looking for accomplices everywhere. His decision to help Thomas was about to be scrutinized by some of the most sophisticated investigative minds in the country. That evening, Rodriguez drove to a hardware store and purchased a burner phone with cash. From a parking lot 20 miles from his home, he sent a single text to a number Thomas had given him during their roadside conversation. "Package secure, stay safe." The response came 3 hours later. "Crossing into friendlier territory tonight. Thank you for believing." 3 weeks later, Rodriguez received a postcard from Vancouver. No message, just a picture of the city skyline. But the postmark told him everything he needed to know. Thomas Brennan had made it to safety. The conspiracy trials would dominate headlines for the next 18 months. The first indictments came within a week of the document release. 17 people charged with everything from espionage to treason. Congressman Bradley Williams of Virginia was arrested at his office, led away in handcuffs, while news cameras captured every moment. Pentagon procurement officer Sarah Mitchell was found dead in her Arlington apartment, an apparent suicide, with a note confessing her role in the conspiracy. The trials revealed the staggering scope of the operation. Over $400 million in illegal payments had flowed through the network over 12 years. Military operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria had been compromised, leading to the deaths of at least 37 American service members and countless Allied personnel. Defense contractor CEO Marcus Volkov received a life sentence without parole. During his testimony, he broke down and admitted that the network had grown so large and complex that he'd lost control of it years earlier. "It started as simple corporate espionage," Volkov sobbed during his allocution. "We just wanted to know what our competitors were bidding on contracts. But the foreign contacts we made wanted more, always more. Eventually, they owned us completely." The trials also revealed how close Thomas had come to being eliminated permanently. FBI investigators found evidence of at least 3 separate assassination attempts that had been planned against him during his time as Marcus Chen. Only his careful security protocols and constantly changing routines had kept him alive. Rodriguez followed every development in the case, knowing that his single decision to trust a stranger during a traffic stop had ultimately led to justice for the victims of a massive conspiracy. But he also knew that his role had to remain secret forever. If investigators ever discovered his connection to Thomas's escape, it would destroy not just his career, but potentially his freedom. Rodriguez never told anyone about the USB drive or his decision to help Thomas escape. Some secrets were worth keeping, especially when they helped ensure that the truth finally came to light. 6 months after the first arrests, Emma Chen received a letter with no return address. Inside was a photo of her father, not Marcus, but Thomas, standing in front of a mountain lake, looking healthier and more at peace than she'd seen him in years. On the back, in his handwriting, "Someday when it's safe, I'll explain everything. Until then, know that everything I did was to protect you. Love always, Dad." She kept the photo in her wallet, next to her father's work ID from the automotive plant, and waited for the day when Thomas Brennan could finally come home. 2 years later, Emma was finishing her junior year at the University of Michigan when she received another letter. This one contained a phone number and a simple message: "Call me Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Use a payphone if possible. Dad." Emma found a payphone in downtown Ann Arbor and dialed the number at exactly 3 p.m. Her father's voice, speaking from somewhere thousands of miles away, sounded stronger than she remembered. "Emma, I know this has been incredibly difficult for you. I want you to know that not a day has passed that I haven't thought about you. Dad, when can you come home? Soon, I hope. The trials are winding down, and most of the people who wanted me dead are either in prison or under federal protection themselves. But there are still some loose ends that need to be tied up." Thomas explained that he'd been working with a team of investigative journalists to expose additional corruption networks that had connections to the original conspiracy. His work wasn't finished, but the end was finally in sight. "There's something else, Emma. I've been working with federal prosecutors to negotiate my return. They want my testimony in several upcoming trials, and in exchange, they're willing to provide official protection and legal immunity for my actions." Emma felt hope for the first time in 2 years. "Does that mean Marcus Chen can come back?" "No, sweetheart. Marcus Chen was always a fiction. But Thomas Brennan might be able to have a real life again, with his daughter." The conversation lasted 30 minutes, during which Thomas told Emma about the small coastal town in Nova Scotia where he'd been living, working as a computer technician under yet another assumed identity. He described the simple life he'd built there: a small apartment overlooking the Atlantic, a job that challenged him without endangering anyone, and the constant hope that someday he could return to the life he'd been forced to abandon. Meanwhile, Rodriguez had been promoted to detective and was working financial crimes investigations. His experience with complex federal cases had made him valuable to the department, though his supervisors never knew that his expertise came from a single traffic stop that had changed everything. On a cold February morning, 3 years after the initial document leak, Rodriguez was reviewing case files when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but when he answered, the voice was familiar. "Officer Rodriguez, this is Thomas Brennan. I wanted to let you know that I'll be returning to the United States next month to testify in the final conspiracy trials. The Justice Department has offered me full immunity in exchange for my cooperation." Rodriguez felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Are you sure it's safe?" "As safe as it can be. Most of the principals are dead or in prison. The few remaining co-conspirators have bigger problems than hunting down a whistleblower." Thomas paused, then continued. "I wanted to thank you again for what you did that morning. Your decision to trust me made all the difference. Without those extra minutes you gave me, I never would have been able to execute the document release." "I just did what felt right," Rodriguez replied. That's what made it extraordinary. The final trials concluded in June of that year. Thomas testified for 6 days, providing details that helped convict the remaining defendants and expose additional corruption in military procurement processes. The conspiracy's total cost to American taxpayers was estimated at over $2 billion, not counting the incalculable cost in human lives. On a warm evening in July, Emma Chen walked across the University of Michigan campus toward the library where she'd arranged to meet someone for the first time in over 3 years. She carried a small bouquet of flowers and wore the silver necklace her father had given her for her 16th birthday, one of the few possessions from their old life that she'd kept. Thomas was waiting on a bench outside the library, looking older but healthier than in the photo he'd sent her. When Emma approached, he stood slowly, uncertain how to greet the daughter he'd been forced to abandon to protect. Emma dropped the flowers and ran to him, embracing him with years of suppressed emotion. "Dad, I missed you so much. I'm sorry, sweetheart, for everything. For the lies, for leaving, for the life you had to live because of my choices." "Don't apologize," Emma said through tears. "You did the right thing. I understand that now." They spent the evening walking through Ann Arbor, catching up on 3 years of separation. Thomas learned about Emma's studies in international relations, her boyfriend, her plans for graduate school. Emma learned about her father's exile, his work with journalists, and his gradual journey back to the life he'd been forced to leave behind. As the sun set over the campus, Thomas pulled out an envelope and handed it to his daughter. "What's this?" "A deed to a house in Traverse City. I bought it last month with money from the book deal about my story. I thought maybe we could start fresh there if you'd like." Emma looked at the deed, then at her father. "Thomas Brennan, 47 Lakeshore Drive." "No more fake names," Thomas said. "No more lies." Just a father trying to rebuild a relationship with his daughter. Rodriguez never met Thomas again, but he followed his story through news reports and court documents. The conspiracy that had started with a routine traffic stop had ultimately led to the largest counterintelligence investigation in FBI history, the conviction of dozens of traitors, and the implementation of new oversight protocols that would protect American military personnel for generations to come. Sometimes, Rodriguez reflected, the most important decisions are made in moments when you have no time to think, only time to choose between right and wrong. That Tuesday morning on Interstate 94, he'd chosen to trust a stranger's story about government corruption, and that choice had helped change history. The small storage unit outside of town remained rented under his wife's maiden name, though Rodriguez had long since removed the USB drive. Some evidence was too dangerous to keep, even after justice had been served. But the memory of that morning, the moment when a routine traffic stop became something much larger, would stay with him forever. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.